about either haven't engaged in training before they're given responsibility to actually teach it in their classrooms, or haven't had the opportunity to participate in training. So today I really want to think about how we implement comprehensive sexuality education through the lens of teachers and what teachers need as a support mechanism around them. After teaching initially, I very quickly moved into advisory work, and I've worked in the Department of Education and in joint Department of Education and Department of Health positions. I've worked within non-government organisations. I've worked with parents and carers. So I have a breadth of experience of comprehensive sexuality education. And it's that experience that I'll share with you today. So I'm just quoting from one of the young people here today, the study that was carried out in Vietnam. And I just would like to commend the young people who participated in the youth conference on Monday, the level of debate, the thoughtful insight, and the fantastic achievement that they had by the end of the day to have crystallised recommendations as a result of this conference, and I hope that we will all see those published soon. So this is a study that was carried out in Vietnam, and I only heard about it yesterday from Son, who was presenting on behalf of his colleagues. And I've heard this throughout the conference, that although we may have progressive policies and laws on the surface in a number of our countries in this region, it doesn't necessarily translate into practice. And when we look at teachers, the description of teachers as shy, hesitant, and lacking knowledge and skills to discuss sex and relationships with their students, well, if that's the case, what are we doing to support teachers to move beyond this? So in this conference, we've heard a lot about the rights of young people to feel safe. And that's absolutely critical, but we also need our teachers to feel safe when they're teaching in the classrooms and working in their schools and partnering with health services and working with local non-government organisations. How can we expect teachers to be teaching about sexual diversity and gender equality if they don't feel safe themselves to talk about their own positions and their own life experiences and their families that are not necessarily the nuclear male, female, husband and wife family? So just bear this in mind as we move through together. So when someone asks, what does a teacher need? What do teachers need? We often talk about training. Teachers need training. And that's at the crux of what they need, and then they're able to teach sexuality education. But it's much more complex than that. And the coverage that we've had during the conference about the importance of legislation and policy at a national level filters right down to individual teachers who are wanting to teach well in their own schools. If they don't have that national context and they don't have that national mandate, they often don't feel safe to take the step to provide really comprehensive sexuality education. I'm going to move a little bit through this model, but I always see students at the heart of what we're trying to do, not only in terms of the focus of the work in comprehensive sexuality education, but also in terms of what they have to offer at every level of support for comprehensive sexuality education. So we've seen at the conference young people talking at the same level that adults have been throughout the main conference about what's important to ensure that no one is left behind, no young person. They can influence discussion and debate and inform us at national level, at local level, at their community level, and also within their schools, directly about the practice within their schools. So let's start with some of the look at the national. Legislation, policy, yes, we've talked a lot about that. We've talked about curriculum and having an agreed curriculum, agreed understanding of what's important. What about standards for schools? And I think what my colleague has just spoken about and said, talked about anti-bullying, the anti-bullying work in schools, not being directly sex education or sexuality education, but it's critical to have those safe environments to enable comprehensive sexuality education to be ensured in every single school. Do we have standards in all of our countries, not only for curriculum, but for the environment, the ethos, and, for instance, the approach to bullying, which provides that context for schools, and the consistency across all of our schools. The evidence base is also extremely critical. Our evidence base can come from studies of our evidence base comes from the evidence of sexual health, it comes from the evidence of gender-based violence, it comes from the evidence of child marriage, it comes from the evidence of unsafe abortion, but it also comes from talking to and engaging with young people in safe and secure processes so that they can inform the national agenda too. So this is just an example. I'm not expecting you to read it, but on Monday, the young people focused on a number of areas that contribute to reproductive and sexual rights, health and rights. And one area that they looked at was comprehensive sexuality education. They understood the barriers from a different perspective. Many of the barriers they see are the same barriers that we see, but they have further insights. And they are also able to crystallise for them what were the most important statements, criteria, recommendations from this conference. So please, let's ensure that our young people are informing in a meaningful way our national context as well as our local and school context. And I hope that this will be published as a result of the conference, along with their other recommendations. So we have in Australia plenty of data around the experience of young people. As a teacher in a school, this helps me to lever in support of the school leadership team. They really understand what the behaviour is, and they understand what the needs of young people are and their experience of school. Let's not forget some of those who are often left behind in terms of having their voice heard. We have a survey as well which looks specifically at the experience and of health and well-being of same-sex attracted and gender questioning or gender diverse young people. This is incredibly powerful to hear their stories. I'll skip over the data. At a local level or at a national level, policy statements that are clear and concise, that schools that can use and that teachers feel safe, that they are working within this context of a shared commitment to comprehensive sexuality education. This is just from a couple of quotes from our policy statement. It's very clear that schools are also mandated to work in partnership with parents and communities, which is another essential element of supporting the teachers in their roles.
I would like to request to conclude.
Well, I'm not going to go into criteria for best practice because I think pretty much covered by other speakers here. But I do want to talk about local infrastructure. If we're really not going to leave any students behind, as well as our national support and our policy and legislative frameworks, having a local infrastructure where we can enable teachers in a local area to share their practice, to share their experience, to share their anxieties and to support one another is really important too. In a local context, you can look at how schools can link with services and provide greater access for young people to the services that they need. This was a project where schools worked in partnership with school nurses and reproductive and sexual health nurses to actually provide some curriculum resources for schools on how to dispel some of the myths and increase young people's access.
Thank you. So I think we have to stop for the questions.
The final thing that I want to say is, can we make sure that we retain a focus on students with disabilities, and not just physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities too. Too often when teachers want to do that work, they don't have the resources, they have to adapt materials. In your countries, do you have resources and tools that enable students with cognitive or intellectual disabilities to participate fully in comprehensive and sexuality education? And that's just in summary. You can't look at teachers in isolation or schools in isolation from each other. We need a systems approach and a holistic approach. Thank you.